Fame and fortune can bring you fans, but they also bring attention from the evil and disturbed. These actors and musicians lived and worked on the world stage and became unwitting targets for the people who'd take their lives.
From street fights gone wrong to shocking acts of cruelty, the tragic deaths of these actors prove one terrifying truth: that Hollywood can be as dangerous as it is glamorous. The story of Dr. Haing S is one of the most inspiring and tragic in Hollywood history. Born in Cambodia in 1940, Ngor was a trained doctor who was unfortunate enough to live through the horrific reign of Pol Pot. One of the worst despots of the 20th century, Pol Pot was the leader of Cambodia's Khmer Rouge government in the late 1970s. He was largely responsible for the Cambodian genocide, which killed as many as 2 million people. During the genocide, Ngor lived in a forced labor camp where he was tortured and lost both his wife and unborn child. Ngor eventually escaped Cambodia and made his way to the United States, but the experiences traumatized him. Once in the U.S., Ngor was cast in the movie The Killing Fields, which takes place amidst the Cambodian genocide he had endured in real life. He was cast as a Cambodian-American reporter, Dith Pran, and won an Oscar for his outstanding performance.
Morgan, I know his heart. I love him like my brother, and I do anything for him.
Sadly, Ngor was killed on February 25, 1996, while he was parked in his car outside of his home. Authorities found him shot to death by 3 members of the Oriental Lazy Boys street gang, who were all later given life sentences in prison. The killers were all in their early 20s and also from Cambodia. Little Rascals icon Carl Switzer was tragically gunned down on January 21, 1959, by a friend named Moses Bud Stilts. Switzer and Stilts were partners who owned a bear hunting guide business together, but had fallen out over financial issues. Switzer thought that Stilts owed him money and confronted him at a California home, and the two ended up fighting over a pistol, which went off and killed Switzer. Switzer reportedly thought that Stilts owed him $50, though it seems that Stilts may not have agreed and refused to pay the money. The two were both under the influence of alcohol at the time of the shooting. Though Stilts was arrested by police and charged with Switzer's death, he was acquitted of self-defense as it was ruled a justifiable homicide under California law by a jury. Switzer had come to prominence in Hollywood as a child actor, appearing as a beloved character Alfalfa in the comedy short series Our Gang from the 1930s and 40s. Switzer continued his career in Hollywood, racking up well over 100 credits by the time of his death. When Bertrand Cantat released his new album in the fall of 2013, there was some pretty understandable outrage, but it had absolutely nothing to do with Cantat's musical abilities. 10 years prior, on August 1, 2003, Cantat had attacked his former mistress, French actor Marie Trintignant, and beaten her to death in a fit of rage. The two were staying in Lithuania, and authorities detained Cantat after Trintignant was found severely injured. At the time, Cantat was the lead singer for the French band Noir Désir. He initially denied doing anything wrong. The couple had gotten into a fight on July 27th, and Trintignant was in a coma for nearly a week before she passed away on August 1st. A year later, Cantat was convicted of killing Trintignant and sentenced to 8 years in prison. However, Cantat was released from prison on parole in October 2007 after serving less than half of his sentence. Marie was 41 years old at the time of her death. She had been very popular as an actor, having won multiple awards for her performances. When Dorothy Stratten was murdered on August 14, 1980, her career in Hollywood had just started to get underway. Born in 1960, Stratten was killed by her estranged husband, Paul Snider, who had been the one initially responsible for Stratten's success by getting her signed by Playboy when she was just 18. Originally from Canada, the couple moved to Los Angeles to pursue her modeling career. By all accounts, Stratten was an incredibly charming young woman, but the same could not be said about Snider, who often rubbed others the wrong way.
He was not on the up and up. You know, if you shake hands, you count your fingers after you do it.
The two got married in June 1979, just before she hit her big break, but there was already trouble in the relationship. Stratten felt dependent on Snider, but he displayed misogynistic tendencies and appeared to be unfaithful to her. Eventually, the two started to move apart as Stratten began to excel in her career, which upset Snider greatly. Soon, Stratten was living with filmmaker Peter Bogdanovich, who had written her into a movie he was making called They All Laughed, which would be released after her death. While they were separated, Stratten agreed to meet with Snider at his house to work out a divorce agreement. Snider subsequently murdered Stratten before dying by suicide himself. Stratten was only 20 years old at the time of her death. While Stephanie Moseley might not have been the biggest star, she was still fairly well known in Hollywood when she was murdered on December 8, 2014. Moseley was killed by her husband, rapper Earl Hayes. Police came over to investigate a shooting after receiving a call from a neighbor who said he'd heard around a dozen shots fired early in the morning in their apartment. Both were reportedly dead by the time the SWAT team showed up. Hayes appeared to have killed Moseley before dying by suicide himself. While it wasn't entirely clear what Hayes' motive was for killing Moseley, the couple had recently been separated, potentially over infidelity, though they were reportedly trying to work things out and get back together. Moseley was appearing on the show Hit the Floor on VH1 when she died. Moseley's credits mainly included doing dance and choreography work for singers such as Beyoncé and Britney Spears, but she also had more than a dozen acting credits, including a role as a cheerleader on Ashley Tisdale's show Hellcats. Acting since 2003, Moseley was 30 years old when she died. Lana Clarkson was a 40-year-old actor who was murdered by the once famous record producer Phil Spector in 2003. While she was not a huge draw during her career, she still had notable roles in a few films. Her last credit was in 2001, a few years before her death. Clarkson and Spector had met on the night of February 2, 2003. She voluntarily accompanied him to his house in California. According to prosecutors in Spector's murder trial, Clarkson spurned Spector's advances early the next morning on February 3rd, which upset Spector so much that he shot her to death. The Spector claimed that she had died by suicide and denied shooting her. However, immediately after killing Clarkson, Spector reportedly left the house and confessed the murder to his driver, who would later relay his words to the police.
As soon as he opened the door, I jumped, went to the back door, and he was standing in the door with the gun in the hand.
Police arrested Spector the night after the murder, but he was able to get out on $1 million bail while he was awaiting trial. 20 months later, prosecutors charged Spector with murder, but the first trial ended in hung jury when they could not get a conviction. Upon retrial, the 69-year-old Spector was convicted of murder and given a sentence of 19 years to life in prison. In 2021, Spector died at age 81 while still incarcerated in a California state prison. Judith Barsi was a child actor who, by the time of her death at age 10, already had an impressive 25 acting credits to her name. This included her role as Thea in Jaws 4: Revenge. She also starred in 72 commercials, helping her to bring in a six-figure salary at her young age. Beneath the success, however, Judith was suffering an abusive relationship at the hands of her father. For years leading up to Judith's death, Joseph Barsi had threatened to kill her and her mother, by one friend's count saying so at least 500 times. Joseph was also physically abusive to Judith. Joseph and Maria had fled the Soviet Union in the 1950s to settle in Los Angeles, but the couple's relationship quickly began to sour, partly over Joseph's drinking. They separated after she filed a police report in 1986 alleging abuse and verbal threats, though no legal action was taken against him. According to police, Joseph shot both Judith and Maria before burning their bodies and dying by suicide at their home in San Fernando, California. Though he got a late start to his acting career, Thomas Jefferson Byrd was a widely respected and admired actor when he was shot to death at age 70 on October 3, 2020. Born in 1950, Byrd did not get his start in the acting industry until he was already in his early 40s, but he finished his career with more than 30 credits. This included a number of Spike Lee movies, most recently the director's TV series She's Gotta Have It. He was also a Tony Award nominee in 2003. Witnesses suggested that the shooting may have taken place over an argument that Byrd allegedly got into at a local store, but police could not confirm this. A break in the case came a few weeks later on October 16th when 30-year-old Antonio Rines was arrested in connection with Byrd's death. He was charged with felony murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison. On June 10, 2016, the world was shocked by the news of the murder of singer and actor Christina Grimmie. Grimmie had shot to fame by singing on her popular YouTube channel and appearing on the reality TV competition show The Voice. She had also just acted in her first feature film, The Matchbreaker, which was released just a few months after her death. Grimmie was in the middle of an autograph signing when she was murdered by 27-year-old Kevin James Loibl. She had just performed a set of music immediately prior to the autograph session at a venue called the Plaza Live in Orlando. Loibl died by suicide after he was tackled by Grimmie's brother following the shooting, and police found more weapons and ammunition on him afterward.
Just don't understand why he would do this to her.
Grimmie was only 22 years old when she was murdered and had her entire career ahead of her. After her death, her brother Marcus Grimmie began the Christina Grimmie Foundation in her honor, which helps victims of gun violence. On February 27, 1985, prominent TV actor David Huffman was stabbed to death by a 16-year-old after attempting to stop a car burglary. Huffman had begun his acting career back in 1973. He mainly worked on TV, though he was also in a few movies. The teenager, Gerano Samano Villanueva, was breaking into vans near where Huffman had been parked. After hearing a commotion, Huffman was told that Villanueva had broken into a motorhome, and he drove after Villanueva, trying to stop and detain him. Once Huffman reached the young teen, he and Villanueva got into a struggle. It ended with Villanueva fatally stabbing Huffman twice. Despite their difference in age, the 39-year-old Huffman was only a little bigger than the 16-year-old Villanueva, and it was not Villanueva's first run-in with the law. Villanueva was given a 26-year-to-life sentence for Huffman's murder. In 2011, the San Diego District Attorney reported that Villanueva had been denied parole and would not be eligible again until 2026. Merlin Santana was tragically murdered in South Central Los Angeles just as he was primed for his breakout. Born in 1976, Santana was most widely known for his starring role on The Steve Harvey Show, where he played Romeo Santana for 122 episodes from 1996 to 2002. He had also obtained roles on a number of other major shows, and he had recently started making the jump from TV to movies. Sadly, that was all cut short on November 9, 2002, when Santana was shot to death while sitting in a car with his friend. The circumstances surrounding his death appeared to revolve around a 15-year-old runaway named Monique King. Apparently, Santana and King were at a house that night when King falsely claimed that Santana and one of his friends had made unwanted sexual advances on her. She left the house and got two of her older friends, who then came back and shot Santana while he was in the car. The killer, Damian Andre Gates, was sentenced to 70 years to life in prison. King was remanded into custody for 8 years, and the other accomplice received a 23-year sentence. Santana was only 26 years old at the time of the shooting.
At the time of her death on August 9, 1969, Sharon Tate was 26 and a rising Hollywood star. In 1967, she was prominently featured in 4 films. Among them was The Fearless Vampire Killers, directed by her future husband, director Roman Polanski. In July 1969, Polanski and Tate, who was pregnant, were living in the home of record producer Terry Melcher in Benedict Canyon. With Polanski away on a film shoot, Tate shared the house with 2 friends. Just after midnight on August 9th, all of them, plus a visiting friend and a passing driver, were brutally killed. The victims were bound together with rope, and the word pig was written in Tate's blood on the door.
One officer summed up the murders when he said, "In all my years, I have never seen anything like this before."
The killings were carried out on the orders of cult leader Charles Manson. The crimes, their most famous victim, and their mastermind have been the subject of countless books, articles, and documentaries since, and inspired Quentin Tarantino's 2019 film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Phil Hartman was a fixture on television in the 80s and 90s. Hartman first broke into comedy as a member of the Groundlings and collaborated with Paul Reubens in the creation of Reubens' iconic character, Pee Wee Herman. Hartman was a standout on Saturday Night Live for 8 years and voiced several popular characters on The Simpsons. After leaving SNL, Hartman got his own star vehicle, the sitcom News Radio. Behind the scenes, Hartman was beloved by his peers for his fatherly manner, but his marriage to his third wife, Bryn Omdahl, was troubled. While they both reveled in being parents and remained married for over 10 years, the relationship was strained by Omdahl's drug and alcohol use. For his part, Hartman was often away for work and could be emotionally withdrawn in the face of conflict.
He had mentioned to Bryn that, maybe I can get you a part. And when he'd come home, say, "Oh, I forgot."
Things came to a head on May 28, 1998, when Hartman was killed in his bed by Omdahl, who was later found to have alcohol and cocaine in her system. After telling a friend what she'd done, Omdahl died by suicide. Bob Crane's big break came with Hogan's Heroes. While the show was sometimes critically panned, it was a massive hit with audiences, and Crane was twice nominated as Best Male Comedy Lead at the Emmys.
Hogan, just because you're wearing my uniform doesn't mean that you're me.
Good. I was afraid this uniform might be contagious.
The success of Hogan's Heroes allowed Crane to live a luxurious lifestyle. He indulged his sexual appetites, leaving his wife of 20 years for his co-star Sigrid Valdez. But not long after, CBS canceled Hogan's Heroes, and Crane went to work as a touring stage actor. He regularly traded on his celebrity to pull off sexual conquests, and even began filming his bedroom exploits.
He loved women and he loved cameras. You put them together, there you go.
In this, he was aided by video salesman John Henry Carpenter, who sometimes joined Crane for a threesome. On June 29, 1978, the 49-year-old Crane was found beaten and strangled in his bed. His friend John Henry Carpenter was the prime suspect, but despite circumstantial evidence pointing in his direction, no warrant was issued. Carpenter was eventually arrested in 1992, but he was acquitted by a jury for lack of evidence during his 1994 trial. He died 4 years later, and Crane's murder remains officially unsolved. Before Charlton Heston, Ramón Novarro was the actor identified with the role of Ben-Hur, courtesy of the silent epic Ben-Hur, A Tale of Christ. Originally from Mexico, Novarro became associated with great romance. In his private life, Novarro was gay, a fact he struggled to reconcile with his Catholic faith. Although he resisted studio pressure to enter a sham marriage to improve his image, he was reluctant to discuss his sexuality, even with his closest friends. With the coming of sound, Novarro's career declined despite his classically trained voice, and he developed a dependence on alcohol. In his final years, Novarro was comfortable but reclusive. He regularly hired young men for sex, though he had a reputation as a kind, lonely man who simply engaged in conversation with his company before passing out. On October 30th, 1968, Novarro invited two such men into his home, brothers Tom and Paul Ferguson. The Fergusons were convinced Novarro had a large stash of money somewhere in his house and viciously beat him when he repeatedly and truthfully claimed otherwise. After 22 blows, some with a cane, the brothers left Novarro on his bed, where he choked to death on his own blood. The Fergusons were sentenced to life in prison, but both were released and eventually reincarcerated for unrelated crimes. Rebecca Schaeffer was a rising star in the 1980s. Her sitcom, My Sister Sam, only lasted 2 seasons on CBS, but it made her famous.
I'm Patty Russell, and this is my sister Sam.
She was poised to close the decade with an audition for The Godfather Part 3, but Schaeffer never made it. On July 18, 1989, she was killed by her stalker, Robert John Bardo, an obsessive fan of My Sister Sam who was fixated on Schaeffer. He hired a private detective to track down her address, went to her home, engaged her in a short conversation with an autographed picture in hand, then came back to shoot her. Schaeffer was just 21 years old. Schaeffer's murder shook Hollywood. The Screen Actors Guild lobbied for new privacy laws, and celebrities became more aware of the potential dangers of unstable fans. Bardo was sentenced to life in prison in 1991 and remains there as of June 2023. On November 1, 2006, 40-year-old Adrienne Shelly was found in her Manhattan office, hanging from a shower rod. Although footprints found at the scene didn't belong to Shelly, her death was initially ruled a suicide. However, her husband, Andy Ostroy, refused to accept the ruling. At the time of her death, Shelly's career as an actor and director had been gaining momentum, and she and Ostroy were raising a 3-year-old daughter. Ostroy was right. Within a week, it was discovered that Shelly had been killed by Diego Pilco, a construction worker working in the apartment below. Pilco and Shelly argued over the noise he was making. When Shelly said she was calling the police, Pilco first tried to dissuade her, then restrain her. He claimed that he killed her with a punch to the head, then staged the hanging in an attempt to cover his crime, although the prosecution maintained that Shelly showed no signs of a head injury. Decades later, Ostroy directed a documentary on his late wife, Adrienne, which included an interview with Pilco.
Part of me died that day.
Speaking with The Guardian, Ostroy explained, "The point of that interview was to get the truth of what happened that day, and also to humanize Adrienne for him, so that he understood all the moments that Adrienne missed." Sal Mineo caught 2 breaks early in his career. He understudied and later performed as the Crown Prince during the initial run of The King and I on stage, and he co-starred with James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause in 1955. The film brought Mineo legions of fans and an Oscar nomination. When Dean died tragically young, Mineo inherited the mantle of cinema's leading troubled teen. He earned another Oscar nod in 1960's Exodus, opposite Paul Newman, but after that, Mineo found good roles few and far between. Then, in 1976, Mineo found a fresh challenge on the stage. He was coming home from rehearsals on February 12th when he was attacked outside his West Hollywood apartment. Eyewitnesses reported a white man with brown hair fleeing the scene, leaving Mineo with a fatal stab wound. No arrests were made for 2 years, at which point delivery man Lionel Ray Williams was arrested in Michigan for passing bad checks. He allegedly boasted about killing Mineo, and his wife told police that Williams had been covered in blood that February night in 1976. But Williams was a black man, and some observers, including Mineo's family, had doubts about his guilt even after his conviction. Born in Ireland, William Desmond Taylor started out as an actor, but came to fame as a silent film director. By 1922, he was president of the Motion Picture Directors Association. Taylor was held up by studio bosses as a paragon of the film industry at a time when various groups regarded Hollywood as a malign force on American morality. However, Taylor's private life included numerous affairs and a wife and daughters he'd run out on. Hollywood was shocked when Taylor was found dead on February 2, 1922. While initially reported as a natural death, police arrived to find the 49-year-old Taylor with a gunshot to the back and a group of Hollywood notables combing through his house.
Paramount executive was burning papers in a fireplace, and there were reports that a silent screen star was rifling through his desk drawers.
Taylor's murder, sandwiched between the scandalous trial of Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle and the drug-related death of actor Wallace Reed, intensified negative perceptions of Hollywood. Officially, Taylor's murder remains unsolved, but suspicion rests on Charlotte Shelby, mother of Taylor's lover Mary Miles Minter, who allegedly confessed that her mother killed Taylor. Susan Cabot's biggest claims to fame as an actor were a run of B-movie westerns in the 1950s and a romance with King Hussein of Jordan. But Cabot's career faded relatively quickly, and though she kept herself financially stable through real estate and car restoration, her private life deteriorated as she aged. She spent her last years as a recluse, endured episodes of poor mental health, and remained a controlling and erratic force in the life of her son, Timothy Scott Roman. Roman was raised in an often squalid home environment and was given several controversial drugs, partly to counter his dwarfism. On December 10, 1986, Cabot was beaten to death with a weightlifting bar in her home, and Roman was charged with the crime. He initially maintained his innocence, claiming that a burglar wearing a ninja mask had killed his mother. But with police evidence suggesting otherwise, his defense focused on his unusual upbringing and mental health issues. Roman later admitted that there was no burglar, but maintained he didn't remember killing Cabot. In 1989, Roman was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. There was a touch of scandal in Peter Arne's life even before he was found beaten to death on August 1, 1983. Born in modern-day Malaysia to American and Swiss-French parents, and based out of the UK as an adult, Arne was a character actor who regularly played villains on film and TV. He also embezzled thousands of dollars from novelist Mary Renault through a scheme to build immigrant housing in South Africa in the 1940s. Arne's escape to his home country to dodge formal charges was accomplished in part by stealing Renault's car. He was more generous to Giuseppe Peruzzi in the 1980s. Peruzzi lived in a park near Arne's Knightsbridge home. At the time of his death, Arne was providing Peruzzi with food. As Arne's home showed no signs of forced entry, police concluded that he'd known his killer, and Peruzzi became the chief suspect. Peruzzi's body was found in the River Thames less than a week later. He died by suicide after killing Arne. Dominique Dunne was born into an artistic family. Her father Dominic was a producer and journalist, and her brother Griffin was an actor. After high school, Dominique followed suit, starting in TV, then playing a featured role in Poltergeist. Shortly before filming the horror classic, Dominique fell into a relationship with chef John Thomas Sweeney. He was insecure, jealous, and physically abusive. One assault left Dominique with bruises on her neck that are visible in her final TV appearance. Dominique broke up with Sweeney after that incident, but while rehearsing at her home on October 30th, 1982, he showed up, dragged her outside, and began to strangle her when she wouldn't take him back. Fellow actor David Packer, who'd been rehearsing with Dominique, stayed inside and called the police. By the time he went outside, Sweeney had been choking Dominique for 5 minutes. She fell into a coma and died 5 days later. Sweeney was convicted of voluntary manslaughter with a maximum sentence of 6 years. He was released in less than 3. Dominique's outraged family organized a negative publicity campaign to drive him out of his chef's job and eventually out of Hollywood. In the early evening of December 8, 1980, Mark David Chapman had gotten John Lennon to sign a copy of his and Yoko Ono's album, Double Fantasy. Chapman was an obsessive Beatles fan and born-again Christian who had become angered by Lennon's atheism. He was also jealous of Lennon. In Apple TV's John Lennon, Murder Without a Trial, New York City taxi driver Richard Peterson gave an eyewitness account of what happened next. It was later in the evening, and Peterson saw Chapman walk up to Lennon as he headed into the Dakota apartment building where he lived. Peterson recalled, "I'm looking at him through the front window of my cab. I'm looking at him shoot him. This guy just shot John Lennon. I thought they were making a movie, but I didn't see no lights or cameras or anything, so I realized, hey, this ain't no movie." Chapman shot Lennon 4 times in the back and shoulder, killing him.
And then afterwards, it was like the film strip broke. I fell in upon myself.
Chapman is currently serving a life sentence in a New York prison. The tragic 2004 killing of Dimebag Darrell, guitarist and founding member of the heavy metal band Pantera, was also committed by a fan. Dimebag was on tour with his new band, Damage Plan. While playing a set in Columbus, Ohio, a fan named Nathan Gale jumped on stage and shot the guitarist in the back of the head, killing him instantly. Gale killed 3 other people and wounded another 3 during the shooting. A police officer ultimately shot and killed Gale at the venue. The death had some eerie similarities to Lennon's. Both happened on December 8th, and Gale was obsessed with Dimebag's former band, as Chapman had been with the Beatles. Gale's mother later said her son was a paranoid schizophrenic. According to NBC News, Gale's friend said he believed Pantera had tried to steal his identity. Selena Quintanilla Perez, better known simply as Selena, was considered the Queen of Tejano, a Mexican-American style of music originating in Texas. Yolanda Saldivar was a superfan and the head of Selena's fan club. She had also coaxed her way into running the Grammy-winning singer's 2 clothing boutiques. Saldivar had access to Selena's business accounts and was completely obsessed with the singer. She also turned her apartment into a makeshift shrine to Selena. When Selena discovered that Saldivar had allegedly embezzled $30,000, she went to the hotel where she was staying in Corpus Christi, Texas to confront her. An argument ensued and Saldivar shot the singer once in the back. An hours-long standoff with police followed before Saldivar finally gave herself up. The killer later claimed,
"I did not kill Selena. It was an accident."
Saldivar is currently serving her life sentence in a prison in Gatesville, Texas.